Okay, good morning. The theme of this week is how little sleep can we survive on? So it's been a crazy week. I didn't do the town hall until till Thursday this week, so we've got a pretty short period of time, but still quite eventful. I do want to warn you that our theatrical cat is right here and may make an appearance. She has been very clingy today and is currently trying to eat the cord for the webcam. No, no, no. Sorry. So she's being very interested in this morning. If you have any questions, please put them in the live chat. I will do my best to answer them. So we really only had a Friday night this this week, Friday and Friday night, and I was slam packed. I worked a 12-hour day. Um, and just a second. Sorry, she's trying very diligently to eat the cord for the webcam. So I'd rather not have her get electrocuted and the webcam cease to function. So a couple of major things happened. I think I'm going to start with local government. So the state responded to my lawsuit, and oh boy, that was interesting. So um, I had always thought of Maine as a lot more benevolent than their arguments made them, and it is astonishing to watch essentially Democrats do the other half of the voter suppression gig. So um, uh, we see a lot from Republican states that their goal is to have people not turn out to vote, and that is a mechanism of voter suppression. And they'll use arguments like, well, there were polling places available, and we couldn't have possibly anticipated there would have been a 6-hour wait, and we certainly weren't negligent. We met our threshold, and we had a reasonable amount of access available. And if you decided not to vote, then really, you could have voted. It was your choice not to wait for 6 hours to vote. And so that's not our problem. That's not something we did. That was a choice you made. Very similar arguments coming out of the state of Maine, where they essentially say, well, we don't have records of these calls you made. As if I don't. I mean, I have phone bills. I can happily submit them. We don't have records of all these calls you made, despite your assertion that you made calls. We don't have records of them, and it just seems like you didn't try very hard in a pandemic, and we didn't technically tell you that you couldn't go out and get thousands of signatures while we were telling everybody to stay home so you don't die. Um, it's sort of an astonishing argument. One of my favorite arguments from the brief is this state of Maine, the governor's office, felt like they didn't need to respond to me because I had emailed them through a web form that did not have a published email address and had no option for attachments, politely asking them for um, a mechanism to, can I please have an email address to send a proposed form to see if I can get, do this last little bit. It's a reasonable accommodation. And so apparently I was very cryptic in my request for an email address, which I don't know how one can possibly be cryptic with that request. And they decided that since I had sent them an email but didn't follow up to send them another email with the attached form, that they didn't need to respond to me, except I sent it through a web form and there was no email. It generates an email. So I don't know if the state genuinely doesn't know how web forms work, or if they expect the court to believe that that's not how web forms work. So I'm just sort of I'm hornswoggled at the state's arguments, and it's both funny, but it's also really sad and heartbreaking. So if we have Republicans who are, on average, their mechanism of voter suppression is we're going to make it so you don't turn out to vote. And we have Democrats, and their mechanism of voter suppression is we're just going to make it real hard to get on the ballot. And if there's times when there should be special exceptions, like a once in a century pandemic, if it doesn't impact party candidates, then we're just going to not address it. And we're just not going to take care of that. If this pandemic had hit 2 months earlier in January, when party candidates were collecting the signatures, the state absolutely would have made accommodations for the safety of the candidates. So apparently, independent candidates are disposable, and we see this all the time. One of the other arguments they made is, well, two other independent candidates made the ballot, so we've got some independents, right? So both of those independent candidates sent an affidavit saying that this was an impossible process. One of those candidates is much more moneyed than I am. He has a lot of financial resources. The other candidate is really a party candidate, but the non-Democrat and Republican, if you're not one of the top two parties in Maine, it is incredibly prohibitive to get on the ballot. So we had a party candidate that tried diligently and then switched before the deadline to switch and said, I can't do this as a Green because it's just prohibitive. So Lisa Savage was so sweet about sending in an affidavit, and she's in a party, so she had the party structure. And so the other argument that was sort of thrown out was that, well, you chose to do this without money or power, or money, power, a structure. So what do you know? That it doesn't work. Well, it does work when you're not in a pandemic. So putting the entire burden of a pandemic on independent candidates and saying, whoopsie doodle, I guess average people can't really run for office, and maybe you should try harder as a part of a party that does a party line thing, because the rest of you, the other like 30 to 40% of you, you're just not politically legitimate, and I guess that's your problem. That's not democracy. So we need to be holding our leaders to account, whether they are suppressing people voting or whether they are suppressing people getting on the ballot. That's just not how democracy works. And the arguments they used were just the bare minimum threshold of effort. We're going to put in the bare minimum that is necessary to look like we kind of sort of did our jobs, and it's just your fault. And that is not the relationship we should have with government. And that relationship is throughout government. If they make food stamps available and it's a 28-page form that you can only access online, as if a lot of people who need food stamps have access to online, or you can drive to a super inconvenient location and wait for multiple hours with your children in tow, because if you could afford childcare, then you would be able to pay for food. We put these barriers in place anytime people want to interact with our government. If you don't have the wealth and the money to buy essentially a government concierge who shepherds you through the process, then gosh, government's just not for you. And that is not what government should be. Our government should be people who want to be civil servants, who are in it because they want our country to work better. And when somebody points out a good faith situation that needs government help, the response shouldn't be like, that's not in my pay grade. The response should be, let's work together and figure out how we can get that done. Do I think that government should have to be responsive to excessive trolling by people who are trying to make their lives difficult? No, not necessarily. Do I think that government should have to be responsive to their citizens who, I paid taxes for the government to make ridiculous arguments against me this week. I mean, the arguments they made, they not so subtly implied that I was, if you read through it, it basically was not so subtly saying, Miss Bond's problem is that she didn't try very hard. She's kind of lazy, and that, she's maybe a little not very smart, and she obviously doesn't know how a web form works, when clearly I did. And beyond that, she also maybe isn't super honest, because we don't have records that back this up. That's not the relationship that we should have with our government. I got my very own troll that showed up in live chat. Hi, Willie. Always a delight and a pleasure. Although I think that you would fully appreciate that our government should be responsive to individuals that are just trying to have a healthy relationship with the government and asking their government for reasonable services that we pay for with our tax dollars. So I think that we should be reconfiguring our government generally, and we should not be doing everything in our power to sort of sneak around and say, okay, our job is to prevent every single instance of fraud that maybe we can find from the poor people who can't defend themselves, unlike the wealthy who, that'll be my next topic, get out of jail free, quite literally. Let's make it so the average citizen really has no defense or assistance from the government. And that's not what it should be. If we are paying taxes, we should all have equal access to being able to make sure that we have a healthy relationship with our government and that our taxes are being used well and that we get to participate when we want to. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody is guaranteed to be elected, but we should be guaranteed fair elections. It doesn't mean that, every person who wants to make change should get to make every change they want to make, but they should have a forum and a venue to be heard and to try to impact that change if it's reasonable change. And that's not what we have right now. We have this system by the two parties that it is set up to disincentivize anyone who doesn't come through one of those two parties and participating. And then the parties try and make cases for which party is worse and really politically illegitimate. And that is just a dysfunctional government. There is a big chunk of us that aren't in parties, and those parties are not making great choices. Um, we are so settled on comparative value as how we gauge our parties that we excuse just inexcusable behavior from both political parties. Right now, one's objectively a little bit worse, particularly on the federal level, but they're both making poor choices as organizations, and they are both trying to suppress people participating who want to do things differently. And that is not what our government should be about. So I am going to be responding to this lawsuit. I read it once briefly last night and, reread a couple of sections. It is most certainly an interesting set of arguments and a heartbreaking set of arguments. Like I truly thought Maine was better than these arguments. And I actually am a little embarrassed that we have an attorney general office that would submit these arguments, because it's really unflattering the way that they make the arguments. It really says a lot about our democracy. So when I have a response to that, I'll put it up on the website. My first two filings are already on my website, bond4.me. The other things that we have seen in the last day or so, we saw our president commute a sentence of Roger Stone, which, is sort of a sideshow, theatrical, distracting from a lot of the other really important things that are happening. But it also is a message. And that message is, if you are willing to cover up malfeasance, there's a reward. And that is also not a way the government should work. We are living in a world where we are being told that it is just too hard for people who have committed crimes that have benefited our executive branch to go to jail, because they'll be exposed to COVID-19, and it is this horrible, fatal, awful thing. Which I agree, it can be. It looks like it's a very painful death. It looks like for those who don't die, there is substantial long-term lingering effects for a not insignificant percentage of people who get COVID-19, ranging from vascular issues to brain damage. There are people who, going on months now, still have symptoms, and they haven't kicked them yet. So it is an unpleasant virus, but they are telling us it is safe to send our children back to school, but these poor people who have been criming, they can't be in small, enclosed, poorly ventilated spaces with others, because we wouldn't want them to go ahead and get that virus. And that's not acceptable. I've been telling people, plan that this fall you should You should be a responsible parent if you are a parent, and if you have any mechanism to do so, plan on your children being home, because whether or not you have the choice, we just may not be in a position where it is responsible to send your children to school. And as somebody who's grown a couple of them, they're very difficult to replace. There are probably places where it will be safe. If you are in rural Maine in a town of a couple hundred people and there are no known cases of the virus within 100 miles, sure, that might be a safe situation to send your children to school in. But I live in Portland. There's active community transmission, and anybody who has had minor children that is any sort of a involved parent would be able to tell you that they just don't have the ability to engage in social distancing. But gosh golly gee whiz, those people criming, they absolutely, as adults, couldn't possibly take the precautions they need in jail, and so they should get that exception. So it is we are beyond a Greek tragedy in what we are living in. This is such a farce. And I want you to take a look closely at the candidates that you're supporting. This is what fascism feels like. This is fascism. When we are pardoning or commuting or dropping charges against people who have helped the leadership commit crimes or malfeasance, when we are suppressing and attacking voters, when nonviolent protesters are being attacked in an aggressive way. This is what fascism feels like. It feels like a lot of people still sort of go about their daily life, and maybe there's some uncertainty, and we're dealing with a pandemic, but gas stations are still open. You still have some relative freedom, but the press is losing freedom. The average person is losing freedoms to speak. There are consequences. We had a whistleblower that retired from the military in the last week or so because they were essentially being persecuted and harassed and bullied by people who are supposed to protect them. So we are in a world that is fascism. If you are sending anybody to Washington, D.C., and they can't acknowledge that, they are not capable to fight against it. If we are sending people to Washington, D.C., that are making trivial laws, in Maine, we apparently really like trivial laws, and lots of places do. If we are promoting people, and just to use this race as an example, we have two legislators in this race, and both of them are women in positions of authority that absolutely could make more impact than they're choosing to, pointing to the other woman in a position of authority and saying, oh, you're not doing anything, and it doesn't really matter which one of them is saying, oh my gosh, I'm working so hard to cap insulin prices at 10 times what they should be, which is still not accessible to people in poverty. And insulin is so freaking cheap to manufacture and has been in the public sphere for so long that it shouldn't even be at a charge. It should be included as a preventative service with your healthcare at no charge at the point of delivery, because the amount of money it saves to have somebody on insulin, which is an incredibly cheap drug to manufacture, is more cost effective to provide that as a no charge service than it is to have the healthcare service pay for the consequences of not taking that. Like, it is astonishing that we even charge for insulin. So whether the pitch is, oh my gosh, I've got a bill going to make you kind of a little bit less poor at 10 times what this medication should go for, and under my leadership we're gonna make this happen. Okay, you want to help people with insulin, make it no charge, because it is an inexpensive drug, and the costs of not taking that drug are far greater than the costs of providing that drug at no charge as preventative care. Or we have another person who is in a legislative role who is talking about PPP and how great it is. I'm telling you, I have a PPP loan. I've been pretty transparent going through the process of how, what the experience is. My PPP loan is not huge. It's $7,500. For a 10-week period, I pay myself $36,000 a year, and they actually did it by months, so it was like 2.5 months. So it's slightly off from 10 weeks, but it was intended to be 2.5 months or 10 weeks. So I took a $7,500 PPP loan, and I pay myself a base salary of $36,000 a year, which is nothing for an attorney, but that is what I pay myself because it's enough to cover my bills. Anything else I take as profit distributions. And I'm telling you that it was incredibly stressful. There was very little communication. It was not well published. The guidelines I made it very difficult to understand how it could be applied. I had an easier time than most because, since I'm a service provider, most of what I was applying it to was wages, which is really taxes. So, I had an easier time than a lot of people getting that loan. And it's still not clear to me, an attorney, exactly, what I need to do because they keep shifting the guidelines to be able to talk about whether or not that needs to be repaid. And, I sort of assume that I took it out knowing it was a low interest loan. And if it's forgiven, great, and if it isn't, well, it's a low interest loan and I needed it to get through the gap. But um, that has not been the salvation that it has been promised to be. They have had to continually update the guidelines. And though it's easy with hindsight to tell you what could go wrong, a lot of the things that went wrong, people could tell you real time and in advance, this is going to be a problem. And here's the reasons it's going to be a problem. So though it's certainly easier with hindsight to go, look, what we predicted was going to happen happened. Um, it's not like those predictions weren't available to begin with. So it's not like, oh my gosh, we couldn't have possibly known. We knew, and we just made poor choices. It is coming out that an awful lot of people who are closely related to the president also exploited and took advantage of the program. A lot of people who had financial resources that should not have qualified for the program. So it is looking increasingly like the PPP loan program is essentially a mechanism to reward the wealthy and help enough people that were small businesses that it was really for them. So that is intensely disappointing. And those are examples of main legislators that are in this particular race, but that is a problem across the country. It is profitable for fundraising to do trivial things that don't really change anything because then you're not pissing off bigger donors, but you still have these ads you can run and you can point to a law that unless you're in a really small subset of people that pays attention to these laws, you're not going to know that the law is hideously trivial. So it's profitable for fundraising to have that. It's profitable to have that conflict. It is profitable for both of the two legislators to be able to point to the other one's record and point to their own, and neither one of those records are as awesome as they say they are. The other legislator, neither legislator is doing a great job, and they are both pointing to the not great job that the other one is doing as if they are somehow immune from their own poor legislation. So that is a disappointing space that we are in. um, to have this much sort of coming at us in one day where we're just breaking the law, and not breaking the law like breaking an individual law. The law itself is breaking. And to have no one standing up for it really on either side. Um, Certainly nobody on the Republican side is standing up for it. The Democrat side, not an adequate number of people are. It is frustrating to watch both political parties be so excited about suppressing anybody but their political party, and participation it's disappointing and it's heartbreaking. And we should be asking for our legislators, our political parties, and the people running those machines to be better than that. But we haven't been. So we have a ranked choice vote coming up for the primary in the state of Maine. I generally tend to stay a little bit out of it because I'm not in a party, but I will tell you that in the Democratic primary for the U.S. Senate in the state of Maine, 2 out of the 3 candidates sent in affidavits saying, and I'm paraphrasing and distilling it down, but both Bree Kidman and Betsy Sweet sent an affidavit saying that this was not a reasonable stance for the government. That the amount of energy I put in should have been adequate to get me on the ballot, and that this was a prohibitive process. And there's our theatrical cat again. So if I were in a party voting in a primary, I would certainly put that as a priority, because people who are willing to defend democratic principles, even if it means it increases their competition, those are people that are willing to face at all. I mean, if you cannot defend the things that are personally inconvenient and may personally limit your power, but they're the right things to do, you shouldn't be a leader. You shouldn't be in office. I haven't had any more questions. I just got a little bit of sass from Willie Parsons, who is one of our reoccurring trolls. So absent questions, I might go tuck back into the bed because I am very tired for this week, and I'm going to lose my whole weekend to doing some legal writing. I hope you guys have a glorious weekend. It is raining again here, so it is been a very damp July for us. We've lost some strawberries because of that, but the raspberries are looking fantastic, is the trade-off. I hope you have a great week. I will see you again on Tuesday. And I'm going to go take a nap and then work for the whole rest of the weekend. Have a great one, everybody.